Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. As always, it's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, and I really appreciate your company. This episode of the podcast, I just want to talk about a few things that are happening around the yard at the moment. One in particular is decandling, where it's coming to a close really soon, and I want to talk about a few possible gaps in my earlier comments and YouTube videos about fertilising, which got brought to my attention recently. So I want to make sure that's crystal clear. Also about what to expect now if you've decandled your black pines, what to look out for, and definitely what not to do. Also want to talk more about natives, Australian natives, and fertilising. It's one of those things that you need to be particularly careful about because of a few issues that some of our natives, not all of them, some of our natives can suffer from, and I just want to put a bit of a spotlight on that, I suppose. And also I want to talk about figs, Ficus. They're very common as bonsai, and I love them. I really do. I think that they're one of those species that everybody should have in their collection. And Australia is such a big place with such diverse environments and weather patterns and that sort of thing, and they grow differently in different environments, but it doesn't mean that they can't be almost a bonsai for almost everyone in the right environment. So I want to talk about Ficus today in the podcast, so strap yourselves in. Should be a good one, especially this Australian natives. Anyone, I've talked about them a little bit in the last couple of podcasts, and starting on a path with them, you don't want to finish it abruptly by doing the wrong thing. So let's see what we can do with that. So the year's starting to get close to an end. Fantastic. I love it. It's warmer weather for us in Australia. Hopefully, anyway. Maybe not quite so much where I am in Melbourne. The weather's hot, cold. It's same old, this massive fluctuations in temperature. But we're generally getting warmer, and this time of the year too, or based on the remaining growing period left for black pines, decandling needs to be, in my eyes, for my bonsai, for my black pines, needs to be wrapping up in about the next week or so. I don't want to go too much longer because it gets a bit too late for me, and then there's an impact with it. So with decandling, what I suppose I want to talk about first is I was brought to my attention that in the YouTube video that I've got on my channel for decandling, I talk about removing fertiliser when I decandle, but it's not explained clearly enough as to why I do that. And when I restart fertilising, I thought, well, it's a great thing to actually talk about now and explain a little bit more as to why I do that. So in the lead up to decandling, I fertilise heavily. That's clear. I've talked about that a lot. Pumped in the food, build up the strength of the tree as much as you possibly can, because decandling's, it's brutal, it's harsh on the tree, and they need to be at peak condition to not only, well, survive is not the right word, but to thrive after decandling, to get the results that you want from decandling. And so I feed them heavily, and then once I start decandling, I take the fertiliser off. And the reason for that is the three things that I try, or that you want to achieve when you decandle, is you want to go from a 1 to 2 relationship, hopefully. So as you decandle, you'll activate the dormant buds. They'll continue to grow for the rest of the growing season, and you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it's going to be, whatever number of buds form from that area. So instead of one bud growing into one long shoot, so a 1-to-1 relationship, you want to go to a 1-to-2, where we can get our division, get our ramification. The second is that if we don't decandle, that bud that grows gets really long, so the internode length pushes out. It gets further and further away from the trunk of the tree. So by decandling and shortening that growing period, we reduce the internode length. So that's the second thing that we get. The third thing that we get is shorter needles, because the growing period's reduced. So therefore, the length of the needle that's going to grow after being decandled is, common sense, it's going to be shorter than if it was allowed to grow for the whole year, because the period of time is a lot less. So based on that, decandling is for a tree that you're wanting to keep that growth in nice and close and compact and all the rest of it that goes with it. which you know about, it's fantastic. Decandling is the best tool that we've got. So if you think about it logically, if you're providing fertiliser like nitrogen to the tree as it's regrowing these new buds and it's pushing these new needles and it's determining the internode length, then naturally you can assume that nitrogen is going to push the internode length and it's going to make the needle length also a lot longer. So therefore we take the food off because we don't want that extension of growth. We don't want, the three things, ramification, 1 to 2, internode length and needle length, the three things that we want. If we provide fertiliser, then we'll get the 1 to 2. We'll get the division, the division that we want from decandling, but the internode length will be long and the needle length will be long too. So it defeats the purpose of the reason why we're doing decandling in the first place, right? So, and I'm talking about a tree that's, it's being refined and you're trying to keep that growth in nice and close. If you're developing the tree, if you're growing the trunk, then, decandling probably isn't something that you're going to be doing anyway, because you want that extension of growth, which gives you then thickening, which develops your trunk and all that stuff that goes with it. So I just want to clarify that I didn't explain why I don't fertilise after I've done the decandling process. When I recommence the fertilising is after those new needles have grown and they've hardened off. So I'm trying to avoid providing nitrogen to the plant to cause that extension to become more than what it needs to be. So therefore I've got to wait until right at the end of that growing, once I know that those buds are stopping their extension and those needles are starting to stop pushing further as well, like they're finishing the growing and they're starting to settle into the autumn period where they want to pull that strength back into their trunk, that's when I'll fertilise. How you can tell when that time is there's a change in the needle colour that comes out. It goes from being that nice, bright, vibrant green to a sort of a more olivey colour. The second is the needles set in the sheath. So if you pick one, don't do it to too many, but if you go along and you sort of pull at a needle, just give it a little tug. When it hasn't set yet, the needle just pops out straight away. It's really, really easy to remove those needles. When there's that bit of resistance as you're pushing, it's a pretty good indicator that the needles have set and they've stopped the growing process. The other is it gets a bit sharp on the points too. It goes from being sort of a pliable, very soft sort of needle to a more sharper point on the tip. So that's basically the indicator to me that sometime in April, to know that when those needles, when those buds have ceased their growing, that's the time that I'll recommence the fertilising of the trees. There are some, exceptions to that rule in regard to the overall strength of the tree. If I see that maybe, the needles or the buds aren't extending quite as much as what I want, or the tree's looking in a weakened condition, then yeah, sure, by all means, I'll make the adjustment and I'll bring in fertiliser slightly early to that tree. And that's, I talked a few episodes ago about these care guides, which give you a date, a line in the sand, a pinpoint to say, okay, now you start doing fertiliser. And that's part of the reason why I'm not that keen on them, because there's so many variables that go into it and there's so much interpretation of what's happening with your bonsai in front of you at that time, that being told, okay, it's now the first of the month and we've just clicked over the calendar to become an autumn period, start fertilising, it's really hard, and there's a lot of judgment call that needs to be in there, and that's the experience that you'll gain over time. Using those guides initially and using that line in the sand, that time to say, okay, now you need to, whatever it is, doing it and seeing the result of it on, trees that are very similar in your collection, going, well, okay, this one responded perfectly. It's achieved exactly what I wanted it to achieve. Hang on, well, this one, it hasn't done quite so well. It's done this. The growth is too long. It's too whatever. And this one actually didn't do anything. I did everything in the book that it told me to do, and it didn't actually happen. It's like, okay, well, you need to make adjustments in those scenarios to say, okay, yes, I know that on this day I do this, but with that one that's probably needs a little bit more, I'm going to start that earlier and give it longer time to respond. This one that's doing exceptionally well, maybe I hold it back a little bit further because it's still got a bit left in the tank and I don't want to go doing the wrong thing too early. Anyway, so that's where I'd sit with it. So that's a general rule for me. Every one of them is slightly different. Every one of my pines is slightly different when I recommence that fertilising process. I definitely use the start of autumn as a catalyst for me to say, hey, you need to be on guard and start thinking about this stuff. But I do those tests where I have a look at them and see, is the colour of the needles getting darker? Are they getting a bit sharper? Are they holding in the sheath a little bit more? Are they starting to slow down this growth? Because I don't want to suddenly undo all that hard work that I've done for the last 5 months or 4 months from decandling till now to sort of set my tree back or to destroy what I've done. Anyway, the other thing that I want to talk about with regard to decandling is what happens now. Like, you've gone through and you've seen the videos, you've heard me rabbit on about decandling, you've got your tree, you've looked at it, yep, strong enough, I'm going to go and cut off all the candles. What happens now? What's the next phase? What should you expect to see? And most importantly, what do you do? Because there's misinformation out there as far as I'm concerned on how to look after the trees and what to do post decandling. And what I'd expect is, and what normally happens is, you go through, you cut off the stem, activate those dormant buds, then those dormant buds start to grow. And you'll start seeing little dimples around the cut side if you've done it correctly and the tree's healthy enough. Don't be surprised if it's 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, just whatever happens. And then those buds will start to push. And like always, I call it the Goldilocks principle, right? There'll be some that are too strong, there'll be some that are too weak, and there'll be some that are just right. And they'll start to push and they'll start to grow. One of the bits of misinformation that I've seen that I want to counter off now very, very clearly is that there's an idea that you go through as those buds are developing, and if you see that they're too big or they're too small, you rub them off like you would with a maple. A maple starts to push buds on the trunk, and you go along, I don't want to branch there, I'm just going to rub it off. That's fine. But with decandling, it's very different. You just leave the buds alone. It's simple, really, really easy. Once you've decandled, don't touch the tree. Just enjoy it. Keep an eye on it. Take photos. Take a photo once a week of the decandled site so you can see an evolution of what's happening with those buds starting to develop. Certainly, it's great. It builds your confidence, which is 3 parts of the process, I think, with decandling, is confidence that you're taking off all that growth and something really good's going to happen from it. So if you haven't done it, then just do that where you can see it happen. And then next year you'll go into it really comfortable with knowledge that, hey, this is going to be okay. I'm doing the right thing by my tree. It's not harsh. I've done all this good stuff and now it's time to get the rewards for it. So don't touch the buds. Once they start to form, just let them grow. Even when if one pushes out and it gets, massive, like really, really big, just leave it alone. Leave it alone. Don't start the fertiliser. Don't do anything, because we want to wait till the tree's pushed all its resources where it's going to push them. And then once the tree's stopped growing and stopped having that burst, then we start the fertilising process. Then when it gets into the autumn-winter stage with your black pines, you'll go through and you'll bud select and you'll needle pluck. And you'll go through and say, you're too big, cut off. You're too small, cut off. Just right, you're the perfect size. If you go and remove the buds that are incorrect while they're still growing, then the resources that were going to those incorrect buds will suddenly go to the just rights. And then what happens with those? They get too much. They become too long. The needle length gets too long. So what we're trying to achieve from decandling can be destroyed really, really quickly by doing the right thing according to some internet information. So I just leave them alone. I decandle. I take the fertiliser off because I don't want to push the growth. I sit back and I enjoy it, and I know there's nothing for me to do now other than watering and spending time with the trees and enjoying the process that I've created through this decandling to allow them to get to the next phase. And when those buds start growing and you start looking at the size of them, I actually get really excited because I can see the tree taking a step forward. And when you've got a tree that maybe you're not decandling, or you've got a sacrifice branch and you see that extension, you can see how much one bud can grow and the, I'll say, damage, the destruction that it can do by thickening in that area. If you hadn't decandled your black pine, then your tree, rather than taking a step forward, would take a step backwards, unless you're trying to achieve a thicker trunk and you're in that development phase as opposed to the refinement phase. That's a different thing. But anyway, hopefully I've clarified that, and I've helped you a little bit with regard to what I'd suggest you do with regard to fertilising and also the next phase for the development of your black pine, which is do nothing, just let it run the course from now until we can talk about it again, around autumn time. Australian natives. I've said before, and I'll say it again. I love them. I really, really do. And from feedback, there's a lot of love for the Australian natives as bonsai. And as I said in the last couple of podcasts, if you haven't got an Australian native in your collection, get one. Get a couple. Get 10. I've talked about getting some seedlings, some cheap seedlings, and buying a few and starting the journey, making the future of Australian bonsai through some of our natives. I did it myself. I went out and I spent, I think it was about $30 or $40 on a tray of these little beauties, all different varieties, and took them home. Tiny little pots that they were in. So put them up into bigger pots, and I've now got a batch of, I think it's about 8 or 10 of these things that are going to start the journey with me, which is very exciting. It's I strongly encourage you to do it. So one of the things that I want to talk about in this podcast is feeding or fertilising your Australian natives, because there's a few varieties that you've got to be really, really careful with. And now understanding the needs of the Australian natives, they're growing really well at the moment. They're loving it. Well, they are for me anyway. And it's been a busy time with pruning and looking after them, and you've got to make sure that, I make sure that I fertilise well regardless. And fertilising the Australian natives is happening for me now. While everything else as we get in towards summer stops, it slows down, I start looking at taking off fertiliser off the exotics. The natives, they're getting another dose, because I really want to ride the train and get them strong and healthy and do everything I possibly can. And with that comes a bit of an not a warning, but just something you've got to be aware of when it comes to Australian natives. I do use an approach for base beginners to say, with Australian natives, be very careful. And there's an issue where they have this issue with phosphorus, and applying general fertilisers may lead to some pretty nasty results, including death of the tree, without being too dramatic. But for Australian natives, I would suggest using something like an Australian native Osmocote, which is manipulated to take out the issue-causing phosphorus. But it doesn't apply to all of them. So, and this was one of the things that got raised. It's like, but hang on, that one over there, that Melaleuca, that's got normal fertiliser. It's like, yeah, okay, that one can handle it. All right, what about that coastal tea tree? That one seems to have it as well. Yeah, that loves normal fertiliser as well. So I thought it's possibly time to dig a little bit deeper with them and just explain where there's issues, what causes the issue, and what to look out for, and what you can do about it with regard to caring for your trees. Okay, so a long time ago I found a paper from Sydney Environmental and Soil Laboratory, and it's on feeding Australian natives, and it made it really crystal clear. They've done a lot of work, a lot of research, and broken it down. And I want to go through a bit of that today in the podcast, because I found it to be really, really helpful to me. So a lot of the trees or the Australian natives that are affected, they seem to be from the Acacia and the Banksia family. So as a general rule of thumb, any Banksia I will not apply normal fertiliser to. They tend to react pretty quickly to it, and it's something that you might get away with for a while. It might be okay at low levels, but generally I've found that if sooner or later it's going to lead to heartache and tears, and I try and avoid that as much as I can. And plants that are not exhibiting symptoms can be made to produce the symptoms under temperature or moisture stress. Too much water, not enough water gets really hot, gets really cold, that fertiliser then plays a different role. So you might be getting away with the normal fertiliser, and all of a sudden you get a hot day and bang, the tree starts to react and you're stuffed, basically. And how it starts to appear, the symptoms, it starts to appear as an apparent iron deficiency for the tree. So the youngest leaves, you'll get start of the interveinal issues. So the leaves will start to look different on the new shoots. You'll start to see the veins in the leaves of the tree. The red colours will start forming on the older leaves, and they'll start dropping the old leaves, and you'll start getting tip dieback as well. So the new shoots will then start to die off, and worst case scenario is death. And I've been there. I've done it. I've fertilised a long time ago, which is where I started this research on my fertilising regime for my Australian natives, because I had a beautiful little Banksia, fed it, and I'm not kidding, like a couple of days later, maybe a week, it was dead, stone dead. I've worked with customers where there's two beautiful Banksias in pots, grow pots, walk in there, and I went, you've got a problem, look at this, it's the fertiliser. They said, oh, we've only just put it on there. I said, you've got a problem, get it off, flush the water through the root system as quickly as you possibly can. Don't fertilise them anymore, put them in a sheltered spot. You've got a real issue with this. One tree lived, one tree died. The one that survived is doing really, really well. The one that died turned its heels within days, and it was gone. So I'm not being dramatic about it. It's seriously something that you need to be on. You can also reduce the symptoms by supplementing iron into the tree's system as well. I'd much prefer to not be in that situation in the first place. So, forewarned is forearmed. You can take action by not fertilising, by learning from silly mistakes that people like me have made with fertilising our natives. Once you see the symptoms, you may think, oh, well, natives don't like food, so I'm not going to feed my natives at all. But that's not right, because that ultimately leads to a weaker tree, and the growth rate of those natives will suddenly be stunted because you're not feeding accurately like you should be. My advice to you is, if in doubt, if you have any concerns whatsoever about your Australian natives, just stick with something that says Australian native fertiliser. Often where I've tripped up before is I've used blood and bone before, and it says on the bag, safe for Australian natives. I'd like to give you my 2 cents worth on that. Is I still don't take the risk with it anymore. I've had negative impact on using it, and I've found the safest thing to be is this native Osmocote granular. It's a man-made fertiliser, so which I try and stay away from as much as I possibly can. But it works really well with your natives. So if in doubt on any of your natives, then just make sure you revert to that very safe space, which is the native Osmocote. Does a great job. It can be a hell of a lot better with a lot of the species, but if you think about the ones that are highly sensitive to it, your Banksias, and of the Banksia family, the ones that are highly sensitive, Marginata, Ericofolia, Spinulosa, the one that's least sensitive is the Serrata. And that's where I think there's a hell of a lot of those as bonsai around. That's where I think some of this, their Banksias are fine, they're okay because I've got a Serrata and I fertilise it normally. And that's what I mean. Like they're the least sensitive of the Banksias, according to this study, to this phosphorus issue that they can have. But and I'll go back to it and I'll say it again, plants that are maybe fine can produce symptoms under stress, temperature or water-related, moisture-related stress. So while you might have got away with it, and that's a term that I hate using when it comes to bonsai, you might have got away with it for such a long period of time, it doesn't take much to tip the scales the wrong way. So I would just be really, really careful. And they've even gone through, the other species, Grevilleas, almost all of them are highly sensitive. So just if you've got Grevilleas, then be very, very careful when it comes to it. And the sort of fertiliser to avoid, chook poo, poultry manure, pelletised or granular, whatever it is, which is what I use a lot as the dynamic lifter pellets in my fertiliser bags. They talk about worm castings, staying away from that as well. Mushroom compost or any kind of cow or horse manure or anything like that. It's stay away from it. As I said, blood and bone with sort of less than 2% phosphorus is deemed to be okay. Would I bank on it? Not really. So I generally tend to stay away from any of that stuff. But like I said, other species, my callistemons, my melaleucas, my leptospermums, coastal tea trees, that sort of stuff. They love normal fertiliser, and they do really, really well, and they jump out of their skin. So it's something that I went from fertilising everything the same way to suddenly going, oh, hang on a minute, you've killed a bit, righto, put the brakes on, go to something that's really safe, native osmocote. Do you get a good growth rate out of it? You get an okay growth rate out of it. Does it do exceptionally well? Does it build the health of the tree? It does okay. Is it safe? 100%. It's super safe. And that's why, for absolute beginners, as soon as you see the word Australian native, just jump on something which is super safe. Then you sort of become a little bit more educated. You start to understand that, hey, there are some species that I can feed normally with my other fertiliser that I use on my exotics, and you introduce that fertiliser to them, and you start seeing a massive improvement, a massive change in what can happen. But until you can get that sort of that confidence and that education, it's really better to be safe than be sorry. But yeah, Australian natives, they are brilliant. I love them. They're not complex. It's just one little piece of the puzzle that some of our trees have adapted to survive in these environments that we've got. And hopefully this sort of helps a little bit, educating and pushing and encouraging you a little bit further to have a go. Sorry for the interruption. I really hope you're enjoying the podcast as much as I'm enjoying making it. Makes the bonsai world feel a little bit smaller and a lot more cozy. Anyway, I'd love for you to become a supporter of the podcast by subscribing for as little as $3 a month. This support will go directly towards the cost of producing this podcast, and it's entirely optional. The link to become a supporter is in the episode notes for each edition. Now that's over, let's get into the podcast. Ficus, oh Ficus, why do I love thee? I do love figs. I think as bonsai they are one of our most brilliant species. I haven't talked about them, I don't think, before in the podcast, but I do. I seriously love these things. There's so much going for them. They're so able to be developed. They love pot culture. They've got so much going for them. They develop massive, massive trunks. They've got beautiful leaf quality. Everything about them. They ramify really well. They run sacrifice branches really well without sacrificing the rest of the tree. I think that they're maybe put into the beginners category a lot, the figs, because you hear these things, oh, how hardy they are. You can't kill them. Not that I think you should ever go into bonsai selecting a tree that you can, neglect and put through the ropes just to see how far you can take it, and you forget to water it just because it's not on your primary focus. Anyway, I think that they're brilliant, and they're probably a little bit pushed aside from a lot of people as they sort of get more advanced. It's like, I'm moving on my figs. I've got beautiful ones. I've got actually a little one that my daughter did she made in primary school a long time ago now. It's got to be probably 10, 15 years, something like that I've still got on my bench. Hopefully one day she takes it back when she's ready to start her own bonsai journey. But they definitely develop really, really well. And I think that they can handle a lot of what we do with bonsai and respond really well. For instance, they can take a hard cutback and they can push buds from anywhere. Backbudding is a brilliant thing. If the leaves get too large, they can be defoliated and push out, and that's a good thing when it comes to bonsai. And I think where I like them most is that their window of opportunity for us as bonsai technicians or enthusiasts is a lot wider than some other species. We talked earlier about decandling black pines, and that's got a really microscopic window in the scheme of things when that can happen. Whereas figs, your window for doing a lot of these things it becomes a lot broader. There is always an ideal time, a best time to do these things and when you should pinpoint in on it. But they tolerate a lot of the things that might get done outside of that window and say, yeah, okay, look, I'm not going to punish you this time by, letting this thing die. It's like, okay, I'll just take a little bit longer to get back to where I should be, but I'll still do it. And they're the survivors, they're the Rockies of the bonsai world. They keep on fighting. They come back from the dead. They always win at the end of the day, and they look magnificent. When I did time up in Brisbane, and up in Brisbane, so anyone doesn't know, Northern Hemisphere, get on Google Maps and have a look. But Brisbane's one of our northern suburbs in the northern section of Australia, where it's warmer, it's more humid, where Ficus love it. They love that environment. Where I am in Melbourne, which is down south, gets colder over winter and they tend to struggle. But as we get to this point in the year right now, when the temperature starts to increase and we got increased humidity, the figs just explode. They love it. The more you can give them at this time of the year, the better they respond. But seeing some of the figs that were developed as bonsai up north in Australia, my God, they're amazing. The ramification, the dedication to the work, and it's one of those things that the more you put into it, the more you're going to get back. And I think that that figs are probably underrated a little bit in places from where they should be. They cope with really poor growing conditions. So if your soil's not ideal, not good for them, they'll still continue to be okay. They throw these aerial roots, which where you've got more humid areas and climates, they can make their way down to the soil and survive and do really well. Down south, we get them where they start to push, during the start of our summer when it's still a bit humid, but then as it gets a bit dry, they tend to get cooked and they die. But there's techniques and methods you can use, like wrapping wet sphagnum moss with some cling wrap around those aerial roots, and they'll sort of push their way through that and make it to the soil. Starts to harden off. Bingo! You've got a beautiful aerial root on a fig, produced in a climate that's maybe not the ideal environment for that to survive and to thrive. So their tolerance levels are so wide that you really should have figs in your collection as well. I think that I'd never put myself into one category of saying, okay, I am only black pines, or I am only natives, or I am only whatever's it deciduous. I think that we get such a diverse experience at different times of the year that your primary focus should be with your bonsai is enjoyment. And I think that figs, for me, definitely have that window where, at this time of the year, everything else is, I've pruned my deciduous till I'm blue in the face, and I'm sort of at the point now where I want summer to get here to slow these things down a little bit. I'm decandling to the point that I'm bloody developed tennis elbow in one of my hands. So I'm at the point now where I want decandling to be finished. I'm getting to the point where I'm sort of running out of puff with that. But then the figs start to take off and they look beautiful. I get all these new shoots, and it's like I get re-inspired again. I go, yes, I'm back. And if I didn't have ficus in my collection, then I'd be missing out on that. And I think that for me, I love to have different varieties that at different times of the year give me that buzz, give me that hair standing up on my arms moment where I look at it and go, that's fantastic. Here we go. I thought spring, I thought this initial growth period was all done, but no, here comes a species which picks up later on. My natives did the same thing to me, a month or two ago when they all took off, and the natives are at that point now where the figs are starting to push off as well. And so as the natives have had their prune and they're starting to come down, now I'm finding that the figs are starting to come into their own. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. It's what I want exactly from my bonsai. So while over winter months when they struggle a little bit in our cooler climate, not necessarily the same for everyone that listens to the podcast, but for me, they tend to struggle a little bit during the colder months. And I look at them and think, really, are they tree for my collection? Are they right? But then times like this come about where I go, perfect. what can I do? I can wire, I can shape, I can defoliate, I can repot, I can do all the stuff that I want to do with them and get them to take that next step forward. And the vigor they show with their new leaves, like it's a beautiful thing. When you defoliate a fig and they get that fresh flush of growth, if you don't have one, you've got to go through that process, because that beautiful bursting of buds everywhere. It's like, seriously, you could not get a better species that's suited to bonsai than the figs, because you take off the foliage and they can handle, in the right environment. I'm very cautious saying this, but they can handle complete defoliation and strong cutbacks, and still, for a strong tree, get that nice flush of growth. And that's the proviso with everything. Here comes a disclaimer, everybody, that you've got to have a strong, healthy tree to do it. But when they do that and they get that burst, it's like so many options open up for you. New branches popping out left, right and centre, and that colour that comes back with the tree, the growth in close to the trunk that you want, that we work so hard for. Figs just pop it out left, right and centre, and it's like, thank you. I'll have a dozen of you in my collection, because you're ideal and you're perfect for what I need with bonsai. So anyway, the figs, there's so many different varieties. There's the native variety that we can get to for Australian trees, and they grow so beautifully. And while they might need some care over the cooler months and to be sheltered, then that's something that we have to do. And if you want to see where they can flourish, if you head up to the National Bonsai Collection up in Canberra, they've got a special room built just for the trees that maybe come from the warmer climates down to Canberra, which can be freezing and snowing in winter, and extremely hot and dry in summer. And they've got these beautiful room where these trees thrive in that environment. So they can be cared for no matter really what your environment is. And like I said, I'd give them the tick of the Bonsai Matsu tick of approval as a tree that, don't just put them into the beginners category. Look after them right, get to know what makes them tick and how they're going to thrive, and then develop them as magnificent bonsai that will give you a smile on your dial every chance they can. I started this podcast by saying I really appreciate your company, and I do mean that. I really, really do. I love the extent that this podcast is getting to be a worm in your brain for your bonsai, and hopefully it's helping you and encouraging you and pushing you along and being informative and all that sort of stuff that I love to do. And please keep reaching out. We are getting closer towards Christmas, which is lovely. Good time of year. Like I said, warm weather for me here. Bloody cold weather if you're in the northern hemisphere, but I love this time of year, and I am prepared well and truly to be weeding almost constantly at the moment. I seem to weed the trees, clean them out, and then turn around and they're back again. So try and stay on top of it. It's one thing that I do like to try and focus on, and I talk about them becoming overrun in my yard, and they are in certain points, but vigilance is the only way that you are going to beat this rotten beast, and because they do detract from your trees. And when we're coming to a period where watering is getting more and more vital, and something that's going to need to be really managed appropriately, having something in that pot sucking on it like a leech and taking that moisture away from your beautiful baby bonsais, then they've got to go. So stay on top of it. Once the best time to get rid of a weed is when it's tiny. If you let it grow and you turn your back for a couple of days, a week, whatever, that thing can spread throughout the pot. So please stay on top of it. That's the regular community service announcement that I'm going to be making for this podcast. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the thing about the natives. I do love Australian natives, and I think that once you can get past all the thought that maybe they're not for you, or that they're too hard to look after, or they need this, they need that, they've got special requirements. You need to have a magic wand to be able to use these things in your yard as a bonsai. It's not true at all. And we're coming to that realisation now that there's not a mystique about them. They're actually quite simple to look after. There's just a few varieties, like I said, the Banksias and the Acacias that maybe are a little bit prone to a few issues. But that's it. It's not a lot. to change your whole system of care for your bonsai just for a few varieties. And when those varieties are looked after well, they do exceptionally well. So they're not something you should avoid because they have issues. You should jump in head first to getting these things in your collection. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for your support. Thank you, subscribers. I love you dearly. You mean a lot to me, as I say. Anyway, please stay on top of your trees. Monitor the watering now. We've got lots happening around the country. Every day I look at the weather forecast and I think, oh my God, those poor people in Perth, or those poor people in Western Sydney, or the people in South Australia. Suddenly you're bloody cooked, and the next day you've got floods. It's the way it is at the moment. So stay on top of it. Keep an eye out for the fungal issues. They are creeping around a hell of a lot more, and caterpillars. They're the bane of my existence at the moment. They are everywhere. They are tucking in needles on cedars and pines. So stay on top of it, monitor them, get rid of them as quickly as you possibly can, because as we get further and further in towards summer, they're going to start doing more and more damage. So stay on top of it. Make sure you spend time with your trees as always. Give them a bloody big cuddle for me, because they've worked hard and they're coming into a period where they're going to need some love and support from you. You've got to get on your game to stay up with them. There's more to come for the year. Thank you for sticking around for episode 45 of the podcast. And until next time, as always, happy bonsai.